This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 9, Idle Hands. Dingle and I were wandering aimlessly along a dark street well after the official Halloween festivities had ended. We had already deposited, at my house, large paper grocery bags jammed full of candy, moist and sticky from the heavy humidity and scattered rain showers earlier that evening. Since the night was young and our energy high, out we had headed again, into the streets with no particular plan in mind. My mom, the Queen of Cliches, often used the one about idle hands and the devil. That cliche was an accurate one indeed that night. Idle hands? Check. The devil? He'd be along in just a few minutes. Most of the neighborhood residents had extinguished their pumpkins by the time we set out, and we guessed they'd collapsed on their couches to watch a horror flick or two. But a few jack-o'-lanterns still glowed, the residents unwilling to shut down this very special, ghoulish night. There was no moon. Passing a few houses as we walked down the middle of the quiet street, we spotted a large, brightly lit target, with a gaping mouth and menacing, pointy teeth. The flickering candle inside had caught our eye. It was one of the great pumpkins that we would occasionally come across. There were no pumpkin kits with stencils and special miniature saws with little orange plastic handles in the 1960s to aid ill-equipped, uncreated carvers. This pumpkin's designer had real talent, and we were impressed. I hoped he had taken a picture. While Dingle kept watch, I crept ever so slowly up to the front door. At this point, the adrenaline always kicked in. Something about standing on a stranger's front porch in the dark of night always felt to me as if one were already inside the house. It was invasive, threatening, and a bit creepy, too. Our expectation for some kind of defensive assault from the homeowners was always high, driving our heart rates even higher. I bent down, paused partway, and looked at the front door for any signs of movement. All was deathly still and silent. Slowly, I lifted the jack-o'-lantern's lid. I could smell the distinct odor of roasting pumpkin pulp from the burning candle as it scorched the insides. With a quick puff, I blew out the flame and was immediately pitched into total darkness, startling and a bit haunting all at once. In a flash, I was up and away, running full tilt with the large pumpkin in both hands. It must have weighed 20 pounds. As I shrieked, "Trick or treat," at the top of my lungs, I launched the orange orb like a shot put high into the air. Dingle and I raced away down the street as it sailed in a long arc, then dropped and met the road with a sickening, crunching splat, exploding in 100 slimy chunks. We justified our pumpkining activity because we knew that Halloween had ended and all of the leftover pumpkins were going into the garbage anyway. Other than a few California communes, composting had yet to catch on. The innards, we knew, were already minced and baked in countless graham cracker crusted pies. We rationalized we were just helping the local populace clean up. 100 yards down the road, we drew up and stopped to catch our breath. Perspiring heavily, we surveyed the area. No one had stirred. All was quiet. We could envision the residents inside the house, faces illuminated only by the light of the flickering TV, as they glanced at their watches, shook their heads, and rolled their eyes in silent acknowledgement that it was just another Halloween night, and a few straggling hellions still roamed the streets. Off we headed with idle hands. Like so many others in the area, this particular neighborhood was flat and featureless, with rows of cinder block houses. The road we were walking down ran straight to our old elementary school, 2 miles away. Serving for years as our daily bike route, we knew it well. Across the road was a large expanse of woods, awaiting the next developer's site plan. It was a large multi-acre plot of scrub pine, palmettos, and the occasional chunk of coral rock thrown in for color. As we meandered along the road against the woods, we came upon an intriguing pile of junk. In the 1960s, there was a period in South Florida during which residents were instructed to dump their junk at the edge of their front yards. Eventually, a dump truck would arrive. Attached to it was a large arm with a long mechanical claw. The driver would climb up into the seat of the claw arm, pull and push a few levers, and direct it to sweep down and scoop up the junk, lifting and depositing it next into the back of the dump truck. It was all about hydraulics, which to us at the time were impressive and surprising in their quiet, crushing force. Simply stated, hydraulics use pressure to move fluids through constrained channels, hoses, steel fittings, and valves, to make other movable implements react with immense force. A Swiss scientist by the name of Bernoulli popularized his theory covering viscous liquids, and today countless devices the world over use his principles to drive mechanical devices with shocking power. Giant cranes, automatic transmissions, and mountain bike brakes all use Bernoulli's concepts to lift thousands of pounds of steel and smoothly accelerate the family SUV. A speeding downhill biker can, quickly and with confidence, come to a skidding stop using just 2 fingers tugging on a thin alloy lever. When the claw operator pulled the lever to scoop, the hydraulic silently squeezed the steel talons together in the tightest way. Nothing in its steely grip could withstand the crushing pressure it exerted. Half of the fun for us when the junk man came was watching the claw crunch and puncture large appliances and pieces of furniture. They could not fight back against the overwhelming mechanical force of hydraulics at work. The giant claw would not only pick up one's junk, like it or not, on each visit it also grabbed a piece of the lawn. Over time, we all had large ditches in the corner of our yards that we repeatedly filled with junk to be scooped up by the powerful claw. This was South Florida refuse removal in the 1960s. Crude, tasteless, lowbrow at best, and decidedly environmentally unfriendly. More amazing than this Byzantine junk removal program was the fact that there were virtually no limits on what could be added to the pile. Sofas, water heaters, appliances large and small, cans of old paint and kerosene, pest control chemicals, roofing material, lumber, and even old tires. No cars. I even noticed that once someone had dumped a pile of wet concrete into the front yard dump ditch, which dried and set to become a 1,000-pound blob. No problem for the claw. It reached down, its hydraulics pulsing with power, scooped it up with a large part of yard cemented to the bottom, and dropped it into the back of the truck on top of the growing mound of junk. The mixture and composition of our neighbors' junk piles was only limited by their imaginations and the contents of their garages. Both seemed to be available in copious supply. Back on the dark street at the edge of the woods, Dinkle and I were immediately drawn to the junk pile that Halloween night. We began an in-depth inspection. This was not a private junk pile in someone's front yard, but an illegal dumping at the edge of the woods. It could have contained anything. We were a bit unnerved as we began our examination. I had read plenty of stories over the years and seen plenty of grainy black and white photos in True Crime magazine, making it very clear that local neighborhood dumps were often the favored spot for mobsters and psychopathic killers to discard their decapitated and otherwise dismembered victims' bodies. That night, we were pleasantly relieved that no deceased were deposited within the pile, and surprised to find that among a variety of the usual household discards, someone had the foresight to toss out an entire wardrobe, including a flannel shirt, jeans, a belt, a bandana, boots, and a hat. There was also an old rusted chrome chair with a red vinyl seat. As Dinkle picked through the pile in the dark, I sat on the old chair, rubbing my chin in thought, pondering the situation and opportunities that might be presented by the castaways we were so lucky to have found. Before long, we both locked onto the same glorious idea. With the loads of pine needles carpeting the floor of the woods, we had all we needed to build a fake dead man's body on Halloween night. Brilliant! We set to work. In quick order, we pulled together a large pile of pine needles and, in a small clearing in the woods just off the road, began to stuff and bulk it up. arms, legs, and torso began to take shape. We realized that dead tree branches were the best connectors and worked just fine to hold the various body parts together. The head was a bit more of a challenge. We didn't have one, so we fashioned a football shape of sorts out of pine needles and, with the bandana, tied it all into a ball that we could stick onto the non-existent neck. With the hat pulled down over the top, our creation looked like his head was naturally grouped forward onto his chest, just like a normal dead man. What to do with a fake corpse on Halloween night? Well, given that we had a chair, and we were next to a suburban neighborhood with woods and yards bisected by a long straight road, we did the natural thing. Dinkle and I placed the body sitting upright in the old chrome chair in the middle of the dark road. Then we tiptoed away and lay in the woods to await a potentially explosive result. It wasn't long before our nervous anticipation turned to excitement tinged with fear. The normal progression of emotions when we were involved in our nighttime hijinks always began with the enthusiasm for the plan, soon followed by excitement as we could visualize the implementation unfolding. Along the way there was usually frustration when something we thought would work out did not. Next was gratification when we found an alternative solution, followed by the rush of adrenaline from implementation and oftentimes the thrill of the chase. Depending on the level of risk the scheme entailed, sometimes a mix of fear, dread, or even terror was also present. We heard the distant roar of a big block V8 and screeching tires as it burned out about a half a mile away. Where was he headed? Was it a Chevy, a Ford, or Dodge, or perhaps a Pontiac? We hoped it was not a Corvette, with its low posture and perhaps a convertible top down on this balmy Halloween night. We didn't have to wait long. As we crouched in the woods with our eyes on the dead man in the chair, we could see the flicker of headlights reflecting off its chrome frame as the muscle car bore down at appalling speed. The engine's roar grew louder and louder as the driver pounded through the gears. 70, 80, or 90 miles per hour? We could only guess the maniac's speed. The louder and faster it came, the more excited and nervous we became. Dinkle quietly murmured that he'd be slowing down soon enough. I calculated that the driver spotted the dead man in the chair just moments before impact. We heard the locking of brakes, the screeching of tires, and an enormous skid that seemed to go on and on. There was but an instant of dead quiet, almost a vacuum of sound, before the explosive impact. Next came a massive crunch of metal on metal and frightening scraping sounds as the dead body and the chair were dragged, tumbled, and crumbled beneath the skidding car. It came to a smoky halt. The most deafening silence followed. It seemed to last a long time, but was certainly only seconds. This was the moment of reality, when the driver realized that indeed he had not killed a man in a chair, sitting in the middle of the road on Halloween night, as he raced at 80 miles per hour down a residential street. Instead, a couple of kids had played a prank. He was going to find them and kill them as soon as possible. Dinkle and I were already in a full-speed sprint, racing through the scrub and palmettos in the dark in our best attempt to get as far away from the scene as soon as possible. The blood-curdling scream from the deranged driver blasted us from behind and spurred us on like a gale-force wind. By the time the incensed driver was entering the woods, we were exiting on the other side. He wasn't even in the game. We could only guess at his level of anger, given the dead man's assault on his beloved muscle car, as well as his equally intense desire to find us and beat us both to senseless pulps, or perhaps worse. I envisioned the mangled bodies of two young trick-or-treaters tossed upon a dump at the side of the dark woods. In typical fashion, we ducked and dodged through the woods and the patchwork of backyards to my home. We slipped stealthily and unseen into the living room, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. Pounds of sticky candy awaited. We feasted on lemon heads, Tootsie Roll Pops, Snickers, and Super Bubble bubblegum, while reliving each moment of one of our more creative Halloween tricks. Like every Halloween before, the apples in our bags went begging. With 2 teenage sisters taking over and bedrooms in short supply, where was Monkey supposed to sleep? Well, his mom and dad came up with a novel and frugal approach. How about a plywood box in the garage? Next up is Chapter 10, and it's called Monkey House.